Hello and welcome back to Cooking the Books with me, Gilly Smith, the podcast which takes us through 4 food moments from the books of our favourite food writers. It's about life through the prism of food, and this week we're off to the Med, yep, all of it, with chef Ben Tish.
I like to look for different areas and different kind of techniques and I suppose more flavour and produce ingredient combinations that are linked to that area and then put my slant on it.
Ben's book Mediterra follows his deep dive into bits of the Mediterranean. His book Moorish looked at the influence of the Moors over hundreds of years on food of the Med, and his book Sicilia was a visceral guide to the street and home food of Sicily. This time he covers the whole Mediterranean, north, south, east, west, to bring us the flavours that Greece has in common with France, for example, Lebanon with Spain, Turkey with Egypt. I asked him why. After pulling focus before, he's decided to go macro.
So how it started, I did want to explore a bigger section of the Mediterranean for this book, and there was lots of conversations about where and how with my publisher, John Croft. John and I had a discussion and said, look, people have covered Mediterranean books before and just covered actually relatively small portions, i.e. kind of Egypt and, a bit of France and Spain and perhaps Italy. But the Mediterranean is such a vast area and, the Mediterranean basin, there's 50-odd countries on the Mediterranean basin. They're all kind of linked by various common denominators, olive oil, spices, fruits, and all the kind of the things that we know, and the food culture. But the food, the actual food across the country is quite diverse, and that would make a really interesting book, which I think it has. He doubled my workload from what I was proposing overnight with this concept, but I think it's quite a unique book in that respect. So yeah, that's where it came from.
Is it much more, it feels to me it's much more about the food than the stories. We're used to you painting pictures of, food sellers with cigarettes hanging out of their mouths selling guts on the streets of Palermo. We don't get this. You make reference to the souks in Marrakesh and the street markets of Cairo, but this is very much about the food. What was the reason for that?
Well, I think one is that we wanted to, there's a lot of recipes in the book. I think there's something like 140 recipes in the book, which takes up space essentially, and we wanted to do it justice in that respect. 100 recipes or whatever it is in a book wouldn't have really kind of done it justice, I don't think, in terms of covering all the areas that we wanted to cover and show the diversity in terms of the recipes, and ultimately that's what I think people want to see. So that was what we kind of said. Right, okay. Well, we'll obviously add some narrative, but it's got to be about the recipes. I actually was pushing to do more recipes because I thought I was kind of thinking, really, are we still missing bits out? But anyway, we agreed on 145 recipes, which we kind of touched on all the key points, I think.
I'm interested because you are such a historian normally, and this feels like you've kind of done that. You've been there, done that, and this is much more about the chef, Ben Tish. How much time did you actually get to travel around these places? What are you trying to say about the food that you do, as opposed to you being a sort of a culinary commentator?
Yeah, I suppose, I love, how much time do I get spent? I've been travelling to the Mediterranean for 25, 30 years. So, it wasn't all right, well, let's go to the Mediterranean and do this kind of whirlwind research. It's been built up over years and years. And of course, when I got to doing the book, and, a load of this came out of doing Sicilia, and Moorish was quite a broad book as well. But yeah, I kind of ramped up and went to certain areas that I hadn't been to, or, had just kind of passed through when I was kind of much younger. But, it's a build-up of years and years of submerging myself in Mediterranean kind of food culture, and what food I cook or what food I love cooking, from the early days, really. I think, what I wanted to say is, once again, this is a home cookbook. And yes, I suppose it's food focused. There's, the chefiness probably comes out a bit, but this is food that I kind of like to cook at home. And the food I cook at home is kind of pretty broad, but usually rooted in Mediterranean. I do cook Indian food as well. That's a passion. But, the food that I cook at home is always, 9 times out of 10 based in kind of Mediterranean, food culture, and I like to kind of touch on all these kind of countries and mix it up and be quite diverse, really. And we do that a bit, my food, I guess, has changed a bit over the years, like professionally, places I'm in charge of the food now, there's always that kind of Italian-ness floating in the background, but I'm now, much more enjoy bringing other kind of, spices and quite a mix of things really into the food that I cook in the restaurants. It's all based in Mediterranean, but again, it's quite broad.
I mean, you talk about, wanting to show where the connections are, but you are going enormous distances. You're going from France, for example, to the Middle East, to Egypt, Greece. What are those moments that connect for you? I mean, apart from olive oil.
Well, olive oil, citrus, olives, spicing in food, the actual diet itself. I think a focus on kind of vegetables and legumes and things like that. Super seasonality. Fish on the coast, meat more kind of inland, and I think the general ethos of eating, I think it's much more than an ingredient. Whilst that is clear, I think it's how people eat. And I think it's lots of different things, sharing lots of different things, and kind of lots of different flavours, and little of one thing. It's a culture. It's the way they sit down and kind of break bread together. No matter where, it transcends an ingredient.
Well, and of course it does. I mean, the Mediterranean diet is now well established as the healthiest diet in the world, although we've got an episode next week going out about the blue zones, which incorporates the Mediterranean diet. But you're right. What we know is that culture is the lifesaver. Happiness, sitting down and eating with, especially around a long table. And this is where we find the long tables, isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, there's that. But I think, in terms of the eating, it's naturally balanced, and, it's naturally season. We bang on about seasonality and kind of local and eating, what you've got. And, that's kind of a trend. But, in terms of Mediterranean diet, that is the kind of the true kind of ethos of it is, it is seasonal. You don't eat loads of meat every day because it's born out of, Mediterranean diet is largely born out of kind of, lack of it's kind of born from a poverty. And so you have to be kind of frugal and eat, more vegetables and just fish when, it's right, and this kind of thing. And I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. Except that your very first food moment is chips. And not just any old chips, holiday chips.
I mean, it was just, they're incredible. And again, I still honestly, I've got a recipe in the book about holiday chips, and, so many people, I think, have had that experience. I don't know if you have, but, places, like I say, like Greece, you go and, you're having a fantastic time. You're at a taverna or whatever, and you're having, beautiful squid, and then you order the chips. And they always just seem to be, I don't know, another level. And it's, it is the potatoes, it is the olive oil, it's the environment, it's all those kind of things. And it is very difficult to recreate that back in the UK. I mean, no matter what olive oil you use and what potatoes you use, and you might get away with a bit of it on a day like today, but Well,
hang on, let me stop you there. I mean, you've said olive oil twice. I've never cooked my chips in olive oil, and you do it twice. First medium hot and then super hot. This has totally passed me by. Have I been eating chips in olive oil every time I've been to Greece?
Well, probably. I think, a telltale yellow. I mean, obviously, I think the Cyprus kind of potatoes are quite yellow, but you'll know if it's olive oil. I mean, they're kind of a deep golden brown that you can't get from frying in vegetable oil. So I would say, I mean, I have done a bit of research of this, and yeah, it's olive oil. Lest we not forget, it's much cheaper over there than it is here. But yeah, I think, a good light olive oil, you cook, as you would do kind of chips here, you cook them very slowly once just to make them super tender, cool them down, and then you finish them off on a higher heat. There doesn't need to be super high where the oil, because olive oil can kind of burn, it's got a lower flash point, but you can certainly get a nice crisp chip off it. And I think finished with sea salt, I think they're wondrous.
And then your second food moment is I thought, right, okay, we're really getting to the Mediterranean here. We're going to the Lebanon. No, we're not. We're going to Berwick Street Market in Soho. 7 spiced falafels. I mean, again, top tip. I didn't know about this, although I have seen the queue and thought, wonder what they're queuing for. Tell me about these falafels.
Yeah, they're just amazing. I mean, again, I've eaten falafels. I've eaten lots and lots of falafels in my time. I really like them. I've eaten them kind of out of, in various kind of countries around the Mediterranean. But these ones, I think they're so good because they just make so many so quickly. And so, and they're just so fresh. The falafels that I've eaten in the Mediterranean, they're delicious, but there's I suppose a slight lack of finesse, might I say. And I don't know, these guys that are doing them in Soho on a daily basis, and lots and lots and lots of them, they've got, authentic recipes and all the rest of it. I've chatted to them about it, but they're lighter, they're really well seasoned. The spicing of it is kind of quite important. Again, that's quite authentic, but they're just knocking them out so quickly, so fast, and they're just doing it day in, day out. And they're the most amazing falafel. I think, it's like you say, if you walk down there, if you walk down there today, there'd be queues around the block for it until they sell out. And it's brilliant. And they just really kind of were very excited and, I think, kind of really, really happy to show me kind of what was what with them and kind of, let me, because they could have been quite secretive about it.
Well, I'm certainly going to go down there next time. But it does make me think that, when you're talking about the Mediterranean, and particularly if you are taking us deeply into those places on the street, the food stores, meeting the people and all that sort of stuff, you are transporting us to the Mediterranean itself. And there's nothing like food to take you to right into the heart of a place, to help you smell it. You can smell the smoke off the barbecues. That is the point, isn't it? But if you're making it a home cookbook, aren't you taking the Mediterranean away? You're giving us ideas. So I'm looking at your third food moment, the chicken roasted with grapes from France. And this is a typical peasant dish, usually a winemaker's lunch using leftover grapes that are in season. Lots and lots of people have done that since time immemorial. But to do it on a rainy Sunday in Clapham, I wonder how much you can actually bring the Mediterranean home.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. I mean, I think it's a mindset, isn't it? I think, you're never going to recreate the Mediterranean in your home in London, but you can do your best. And I think the dishes are... it's a mindset, they're all, I would say the dishes in the book, they're all very, there's a vibrancy to them. They are transportive, I think. How would you bring the Mediterranean to your home on a wet Sunday afternoon in February? You could either do one way of trying to help with that is doing a roast chicken with grapes and rosemary and all that kind of thing, as opposed to doing roast chicken and bread sauce. I think it's it goes some way to transporting you to the Mediterranean. Now you're never going to be able to kind of do that fully, but I think if you imagine very hard, then you might kind of get some way there.
Well, actually, I think that it can be done. I mean, I talked to Amber Guinness recently about her book, Terrania, and actually using things like capers. If you put capers with a dish, immediately, particularly if you're using lemons as well, you are absolutely taken to that place. There are certain ingredients, aren't there? And I'm looking at your fourth food moment, the flourless chocolate torte, coffee, orange and cardamom. And I would say that orange and cardamom would absolutely take you, not just to Turkey, where this one comes from, but to a lot of places in the Middle East. This is East Med, isn't it? Which I find one of the most fascinating places.
I mean, yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, again, it's I wanted to kind of include that as a moment because, it's not an authentic, it was at a cafe that we tried and, the cafe had a lot of Western influence in terms of the menus, the techniques of the cakes and things like that. A lot of them were kind of born from, I think the chef had worked in France or London, but was including... so refined and really nice, because again, Middle East, there's some amazing things to have there, but for a UK palate, some of it's quite challenging, or not, or too sweet, or and that's and that's just the nature of it. But this cake was kind of born from a kind of a quite a refined, not Eastern but more Western kind of technique, and then infused with all these kind of amazing Middle Eastern flavours. That's transportive in a way as well. Yeah, that's one of my favourite cakes actually, and it's something that I now. You'll find it in a couple of our pubs through the summer.
So let's talk about your culinary journey, your restaurant journey. I mean, you started off kind of in an interesting place in that it was a sort of a resistance to that Michelin-starred French cooking that kind of created your career in contrast to that, haven't you?
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, I mean, I fell into Mediterranean food by accident. I fell into catering by accident, to be honest with you. And then the company that I was working for was kind of. I was waiting for another restaurant to open. It was a kind of a transitional period. And they said, "Well, look, we've got a few months till this happens. Go and work. We've just opened this Italian restaurant." In St James's, and can you go and work there and help them out? And I did. And when I first got in there, I thought this is ridiculous. This is kind of like it's too simple.
It was Southern Italian, wasn't it? Al Duca you're talking about?
Southern Italian, El Duca, and then eventually kind of got into it, and I think. Food was great. I loved the food. I began to fall in love with the food. But for me, it was more than that. It was more about the culture there of the, and the chefs. They were all Italian, pretty much. And the head chef was obviously Italian. And it was just how they carried on, and how they were just really passionate about the ingredients that were coming through the door and the produce, which I hadn't seen before. Even working in a Michelin-star restaurant, you didn't even talk about the ingredients. Seasonality wasn't a thing. And so this was all came to the forefront, and, they're cooking over a charcoal grill, which I'd never seen before. And, it was two things on the plate, and boom, and it was great. And we were making pasta, and it was all these things I hadn't done. I thought, actually, I really like this. And then just ended up staying a bit longer. Then the chef left, and I ended up stepping up, and that was it. And then it kind of, that's kind of where it started.
Yeah, and then you went from there to the Salt Yard, which is all about Spain, Italy, North Africa, and Greece and the Maghreb. I mean, I find this book really interesting because it covers so much. But actually, your experience at Salt Yard would have just thrown you into this massive sort of area and an expanse of flavours and techniques. And that's what's interesting about this. I mean, when you opened Norma in 2019, that was very much about the sort of the Sicilian, the Moorish influenced restaurant. But your interest comes from sort of, you mentioned going on a wine trip to Slovenia and the Croatian coast. Lots of new ideas there. I mean, when you're putting together a proposal, I'm very interested in the process of writing food books. When you put together a proposal, how much are you looking for new, undiscovered, set against the kind of the very, very traditional? I'm looking at the Croatian coast in particular. I haven't seen a lot of Croatian recipes before.
Yeah, no, I'm always looking. I mean, what I do is there's when I'm putting a proposal together, I put, and I think, I can probably say with a bit of experience now, this is my fifth book, but I will take key kind of ingredients and I suppose some key dishes, and I will try and tweak them. I mean, I wouldn't have a book full of authentic recipes. I think, there's probably, I don't know, maybe 10 authentic recipes throughout Mediterra. The rest are based on authentic recipes, but with, I guess, my kind of through my lens, if you like, because Yeah, I just think that there's been lots of authentic Mediterranean cookbooks. And whilst there's, you know, there is some influences there, I think it's different in that, it's got my view on that. So I always, I like to look for different areas and different, you know, and different kind of techniques and different, more flavour and produce ingredient combinations that are linked to that area, and then put my slant on it.
So you'll be looking for the smoky grilled meats, for instance, and the aromatic spices, the juicy stone fruits, and you'll be going, yep, that's mine. I'll have some of that.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So what next then, Ben? So you've done the entire Mediterranean. Will you go deep into one little bit of it, or will you kind of choose somewhere completely different?
No, it will always be Mediterranean. I wouldn't feel... You know, I wouldn't have the breadth or the scope to get into, all the time to get into something completely new altogether. I would like to focus on southern Italy. So a bit, so I guess, which is still quite broad, but I suppose like, you know, the Mezzogiorno. So everything's kind of south down to, still covering a bit more. So there's still loads to talk about Sicily. I mean, I've only just kind of, my last book only just kind of touched the sides really. But yeah, I would like to, I've started knocking a proposal around, but we need to see what happens with this book next.
Taranto, I think, is a fascinating area because it's poor and it's where a lot of Middle Eastern migrants are coming in. And they are, at the moment, I was talking to Sophie Grigson about this and asking if they are penetrating the Italian cucina povera down there. She said, God, no, you can't touch the cucina povera. It is absolutely sacrosanct. But I bet you over time, what you've told us all about Moorish cuisine, you know, it does penetrate, doesn't it? It penetrates even the most stable of culinary cultures. Those influences, they do spread over time, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, obviously where it is most prevalent, if we're talking Italy, is Sicily. And, you know, I think just the fact that there's, you know, I think the one that for me is the couscous, and how that is kind of a staple on the west coast of Sicily. You know, you go to like Marsala and the kind of area and Trapani. Seafood on the coast, seafood and couscous is a staple. And, you know, and I just think that kind of, okay, yeah, it's reasonably near to kind of the North African coast as well, but that Moorish influence there that's where it's most prevalent, and you know you can just really see how that's you know it's not even an influence; it's kind of, you know, it's put its stamp on it completely.
And will you ever go there, Ben? Will you take your Indian wife and go and settle somewhere in Palermo?
I don't know about Palermo, to be honest with you. It's a little bit wild. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely talk of doing something. I think, you know, we'd love to, but at the minute it's, I think the next step is to move out of London. I think, move somewhere a bit quieter, and then let's see in maybe 5-6 years' time, something like that. But yeah, I would like to move. I would like to move abroad, and to the Med, but. Would it be Sicily? I don't know. Could it be Puglia? Yes, that's probably more interesting. That's kind of a where, in terms of Italy, that's my kind of hotspot at the minute. I think. I just think it's wonderful.
And would you cook there? You know, would you see your way to opening a restaurant down there or doing something down there? I mean, is that what pulls you? Yeah,
possibly. I mean, I think, you know, ideally there would be more writing, but yeah, it could be. I don't think it would be a restaurant. I think it might be that, you know, there's perhaps a house where I could open it up a couple of times a week and do a lunch and maybe people can cook with me, something like that. Not really a cooking school, but well, sort of, but where it ends up in a meal and we all sit down and enjoy it and kind of have a glass of wine, and that happens 2 or 3 days a week, something like that. So yes, I'd still be able to kind of get my cooking hit, monetize it somehow, and and not have to worry about running a restaurant. That's something that I'm kind of trying to get out of, to be honest. So, at some stage.
Thanks for listening. Head over to my Substack for extra bites of Tish's Mediterra. And let me know what you think on social. I'll see you next week.